been 53 years since the Supreme Court ruled that the Virginia law violated the 14th Amendment, the guaranteed protection of citizens' rights, and that they cannot be violated by the state. The case made headlines and made a breakthrough in history, especially when it came to the civil rights movement at the time. Mildred Jeter was born in 1939 in Virginia. She was of African and Native American descent. Richard Loving was born in 1933 in Virginia. He was of Caucasian descent. The couple were childhood sweethearts, and as they grew up, they later married, despite the fact that it was illegal in their hometown. The couple couldn't marry in Virginia because of the Racial Integrity Act of 1924, so the couple went to Washington, D.C. and married on June 2, 1958. One night, while the couple was sleeping at around 2 a.m., two sheriffs made their way into the Lovings' home. They stood next to the bed, flashing lights at them. They questioned the couple and then went on to arrest them.
The court in Virginia gave the Lovings the decision to either go to prison or be exiled from Virginia for 25 years. The Lovings chose to pack their belongings and leave. The couple soon returned to Virginia, secretly knowing that they are risking the fact of getting caught. The Lovings attempted to hire lawyers to fight for their case, and after being told by Robert Kennedy to write a letter to the ACLU, an organization that works to preserve individual rights to everyone, they were provided with two lawyers. One of them, Philip Herskop, we interviewed. His opinions on the Lovings were, and I quote, "I only met the Lovings half a dozen times. Several were just short meetings. I had one lengthy meeting with them when I drafted this new lawsuit. Before I filed them, I met with the Lovings to review the lawsuit, mainly the pros and cons of starting this case. The Lovings did not want any publicity. After that lengthy conversation, I never had any long conversations with them. We never even went to their homes. I met them a couple of times at press conferences after we won the case. From what I learned of the wife, she was immediately likable, very soft-spoken and giving a level of comforting. Both of them were advertised in the spotlight, and they wanted to be left alone to raise their kids. The husband looked like a redneck. He came from a segregated area, but in the area where they grew up, there was a lot of intermingling. Not a lot of marriage, however. He was gruff and quiet. The wife always answered the questions." End quote.
During this time, it was the Civil Rights Movement, the assassination of John F. Kennedy, the Cold War, the Vietnam War, foreign affairs, the spread of communism, the space race, and much more were occurring around the world during this era. The Lovings were inspired by the civil rights movement that was happening all over America. Many activists, like Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Rosa Parks, Judith Butler, and many others were a part of the movement to fight for equal rights for many different groups. They fought for their freedom in protests such as the Montgomery bus boycott, Freedom Riders, March on Washington, Selma to Montgomery, the Stonewall riots, and many other protests that fought for the rights of minorities and homosexuals in America.
The reason that John F. Kennedy was focusing on American affairs was because he believed that if minorities were not granted the equal rights as everyone else, then they would become communist.
The Lovings needed to get the case reversed by the original judge. After waiting a year, they finally get a response from Judge Bazell. His response was, "Almighty God created the races white, black, yellow, Malay, and red, and he placed them on separate continents. And but for the interference with his arrangement, there would be no cause for such marriages. The fact that he separated the races showed that he did not intend for the races to mix." The Loving versus Virginia case eventually made its way up to the United States Supreme Court, where there was oral arguments that was recorded.
And that is the right of Richard and Mildred Loving to wake up in the morning or to go to sleep at night, knowing that the sheriff will not be knocking on their door or shining a light in their face in the privacy of their bedroom.
June 12, 1967, the United States Supreme Court, under the leadership of Chief Justice Earl Warren, made the final decision unanimously that Virginia's marriage law violated the 14th Amendment. In our interview with Philip Erskop, he said that despite the fact the Supreme Court had to make an exception for him to defend the Lovings, he never had the fear that the trial wouldn't go into the Lovings' favor, especially after the Supreme Court granted review.
The Lovings were happy that they could go home and live a happy marriage while raising their kids. 8 years after the ruling of the Loving versus Virginia case, in June 29, 1975, the Lovings got into an automobile accident. Mildred lost sight in her right eye and Richard lost his life. Mildred Loving didn't pass away until May 2, 2008 due to a lung infection. Richard and Mildred Loving are currently buried at St. Stephen's Baptist Church Cemetery in Virginia.
In an interview with the NBC and Mildred Loving, she was quoted saying that she never believed herself to be a hero. Yet despite her belief, she and her husband's courage to fight for their love has allowed millions of interracial Americans to express their love. They are remembered for their efforts in the Supreme Court, as well as in the movie Loving, which tells the story of the Lovings and their fight for their love.
I'm gonna build you a house. Right here. Our house.
The Loving versus Virginia case has impacted relationships other than interracial. For example, their case has affected the legalization of same-sex marriages in June 26, 2015. The Loving versus Virginia case became a historical event that helped bring the end of segregation in America. Thanks to the Lovings, many children and influencers like Dwayne Johnson, Barack Obama, Meghan Markle, and many others would not be alive if it wasn't for this couple's decision not to give up.
Tell the judge I love my wife.